The sledgehammer was halfway to the pool's metal frame when Karen's shrill voice cut through the peaceful Saturday morning air like nails on a chalkboard. "Stop. What do you think you're doing to my view?" Sarah Martinez nearly choked on her coffee as she watched her neighbor barrel across the property line, her bathrobe flapping behind her like a deranged superhero cape. At 7 a.m. sharp, Sarah had been enjoying what she planned as a quiet morning, watching the demolition crew she'd hired dismantle her old above-ground pool. The 15-year-old eyesore had been leaking for months, and she finally saved enough to have it properly removed and the space converted into the garden she'd always dreamed of. "Excuse me." Sarah set down her mug on the patio table, her voice carefully controlled despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. She'd lived next to Karen Williamson for 3 years and had learned that the woman had an opinion about everything that happened within a 2-block radius. You can't just tear down that pool without consulting the neighbors. Karen planted herself directly in front of the demolition foreman, a weathered man named Tony who looked like he'd seen every variety of suburban drama imaginable. "This affects all of our property values." Tony glanced between the two women, his expression suggesting this wasn't his first rodeo with neighborhood disputes. "Ma'am, this is private property. The homeowner has all the permits she needs." Sarah stepped closer, her patience already wearing thin. "Karen, it's my pool on my property. I don't need to consult anyone about removing it." "That's where you're wrong." Karen's voice rose another octave, causing several other neighbors to peek out their windows. Mrs. Chen from across the street had her curtains pulled back, clearly settling in for the morning's entertainment. The HOA guidelines clearly state that any major changes to outdoor structures require community input. This was news to Sarah, who had spent considerable time reviewing the HOA documents before purchasing her home. "Karen, that only applies to new construction and additions. I'm removing something, not building it." "Don't you dare lecture me about HOA rules, young lady." Karen's face was now an alarming shade of red that clashed terribly with her lime green bathrobe. "I've been the unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator for 8 years. I know every rule in that book." Tony cleared his throat diplomatically. "Ladies, I hate to interrupt, but my crew is on the clock. We've got 2 more jobs today, so if there's going to be a delay—" "There's no delay," Sarah said firmly, pulling out her phone. "Karen, would you like to see the permits? The HOA approval letter? Or maybe the receipt showing I own this property and can do what I want with it?" But Karen wasn't listening. She was too busy inspecting the pool from every angle, taking photos with her phone and muttering about property destruction and neighborhood character. She circled the pool like a detective at a crime scene, occasionally stopping to point dramatically at different sections. "This pool has been part of this neighborhood's aesthetic for over a decade," she declared as if announcing a historical landmark designation. "My realtor specifically mentioned the resort-like ambience it provides to the entire block." Sarah felt a puzzle piece click into place. "Your realtor? Karen, are you selling your house?" The question seemed to catch Karen off guard. She fumbled with her phone, nearly dropping it. That's none of your business. The point is, you're being incredibly selfish by destroying something that benefits the entire community." "Benefits the community?" Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "Karen, it's been green with algae for 2 months. Half the liner is hanging off the side, and there's a family of raccoons that's basically moved into the filter housing. If anything, I'm doing the neighborhood a favor." "That's not the point." Karen's voice cracked slightly, betraying a desperation that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "You should have given us notice. You should have asked what we thought. You should have considered alternatives." Tony had heard enough. He gestured to his crew, who began unloading their equipment with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back to a safe distance. This is happening today with or without your approval." Karen's eyes blazed with fury as she realized she was losing control of the situation. "Fine, but this isn't over. I'm calling the HOA president, code enforcement, and anyone else who will listen. Mark my words, Sarah Martinez, you're going to regret bulldozing your way through this neighborhood's standards." As Karen stormed back to her house, her bathrobe billowing dramatically behind her, Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. She just made an enemy, and something told her that Karen Williamson wasn't the type to make idle threats. By Monday morning, Sarah knew Karen hadn't been bluffing. Her phone buzzed at 6:45 a.m. with a call from Janet Morrison, the HOA president, her voice tight with barely contained irritation. "Sarah, I need you to know that I've received 4 separate complaints about your pool removal since Saturday," Janet said without preamble. 4, in 1 weekend, from the same person. Sarah groaned, still groggy from sleep. "Let me guess, Karen Williamson. She's claiming you violated Section 12.3 of the community guidelines regarding structural modifications. She's also filed a formal grievance about unauthorized demolition and is demanding an emergency board meeting." Janet's sigh was audible through the phone. "I'm calling because I need to see your permits and approval documentation." Not because I doubt you, she added quickly, but because Karen is threatening to escalate this to the county if we don't take immediate action. After hanging up, Sarah discovered that Karen's weekend had been busy in other ways too. Her neighbor had apparently spent Sunday afternoon conducting what could only be described as a door-to-door campaign against her. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down called to apologetically report that Karen had spent 20 minutes on her doorstep, complete with printed photos of the pool demolition, explaining why this was the beginning of the end for their property values. She had charts, Sarah, Mrs. Patterson said, sounding genuinely bewildered. Actual charts about how removing pools affects neighborhood aesthetics. She wanted me to sign some kind of petition. The situation escalated further when Sarah arrived home from work Monday evening to find a city code enforcement officer waiting in her driveway. Officer Rodriguez looked as tired as Sarah felt. "Miss Martinez, I'm here about a complaint regarding unauthorized demolition on your property," he said, consulting his clipboard. "The complainant alleges you removed a permanent structure without proper permits." Sarah felt her blood pressure spike. "I have all my permits. The pool wasn't permanent. It was above ground. And I got HOA approval in writing 3 weeks ago." "That's what I figured," Officer Rodriguez replied with a knowing look. "We get calls like this sometimes. Neighbor disputes disguised as code violations. But I still have to follow up on every complaint. Can I see your documentation?" While Sarah retrieved her paperwork, Officer Rodriguez shook his head. The person who called this in was persistent. "Called 3 times today, actually. Once to report illegal demolition, once to claim you were destroying neighborhood character, and wants to suggest you might be planning to build something else without permits." Something else. She seemed to think the pool removal was phase 1 of some larger construction project. Asked if we were going to inspect for suspicious excavation activity. He chuckled. "Ma'am, I've seen suspicious excavation activity. This ain't it." But Karen's campaign wasn't limited to official channels. Sarah discovered Tuesday morning that her neighbor had taken her grievances online. The Willowbrook Neighborhood Watch Facebook group, which Sarah hadn't even known existed, now featured multiple posts from Karen, complete with photos she'd apparently taken from her second-story window. "Concerned neighbors, major demolition happening without community input," read one post accompanied by a photo of Tony's crew removing the pool liner. "What's next? Will we allow anyone to tear down anything they want without considering the impact on our beautiful community?" The post had generated 17 comments, most of them confused residents asking what the big deal was about removing an old pool. But Karen had responded to each one with increasingly frantic explanations about precedent and slippery slopes. Sarah's friend Mike, who lived 4 streets over, texted her a screenshot of another post. "Pool removal is just the beginning. Mark my words, there will be an eyesore structure in its place within months. We need to protect our property values." The final straw came Wednesday evening when Sarah was working in her yard, planning the garden layout for the space where the pool had been. She noticed Karen standing at her upstairs window, not even pretending to be subtle about taking photos. When Sarah waved, Karen quickly ducked behind her curtains. 10 minutes later, Sarah's phone rang. It was Janet Morrison again. "Sarah, I'm sorry to bother you, but Karen just called me at home. She's claiming you're installing suspicious landscaping and wants me to send someone to inspect your yard for unauthorized modifications." "Janet, I'm literally just measuring the space with a tape measure." "I know. I told her that. But she's threatening to contact the county planning office tomorrow. She says if the HOA won't protect the neighborhood, she'll find someone who will." As Sarah hung up, she noticed several neighbors had come outside. Some walking dogs, others checking mailboxes, all of them stealing glances at her yard. Karen had managed to turn her simple home improvement project into the neighborhood's primary source of entertainment and gossip. But what Sarah didn't know yet was that Karen's obsessive campaign was about to reveal the real reason behind her desperate interference, and the revelation would change everything about how the neighbors viewed this increasingly absurd situation. Standing at her kitchen window that night, watching Karen's silhouette pace back and forth in her upstairs room, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than mere nosiness. Karen's behavior had crossed the line from annoying to unhinged, and people didn't usually lose their minds over other people's landscaping choices. There was something Karen wasn't telling anyone, and Sarah was determined to find out what it was. The revelation came from an unexpected source on Thursday afternoon. Sarah was pulling weeds from her front flower bed when her neighbor Tom Hendricks approached, looking uncomfortable and carrying what appeared to be a realtor's flyer. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about Karen," Tom said, glancing around nervously as if expecting Karen to materialize from behind a bush. "My wife Lisa thinks I should mind my own business, but this has gone too far." Tom had lived across the street for 12 years and was generally known as the neighborhood's voice of reason. If he was approaching her with information about Karen, it had to be significant. "What's going on, Tom?" He held up the flyer. a glossy real estate listing for Karen's house. Karen's been trying to sell her place for 2 months. Lisa and I knew because we got one of these in our mailbox back in March. But here's the thing. He flipped the flyer over to reveal interior and exterior photos of Karen's home. Sarah's breath caught. One of the photos, labeled Relaxing Backyard View from Master Bedroom, clearly showed Karen's upstairs window view and prominently featured Sarah's pool in the background, sparkling blue and inviting in the carefully staged photograph. "She's been using your pool as a selling point," Tom continued, his voice heavy with the weight of uncomfortable truth. The listing description mentions resort-like ambience and scenic backyard views that enhance the property's recreational appeal. Sarah stared at the flyer, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. That's why she was taking photos from her window. That's why she's been so desperate about the pool removal. "It gets worse," Tom said grimly. "My buddy Rick is a realtor with Coldwell Banker. He told me Karen's agent has been showing this house to clients for weeks, specifically highlighting that pool view. According to Rick, her agent was telling potential buyers that the pool added at least $15,000 to the perceived value of Karen's property because it created a luxury resort feeling without the maintenance costs." Sarah felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. She'd been profiting off my property, using my pool to sell her house. That's not even the worst part. Tom looked genuinely sympathetic. Rick heard through the realtor grapevine that Karen had 2 serious offers fall through in the past month. Both times, the buyers came back for second looks and noticed the pool was gone. When they found out it wasn't part of Karen's property and that it was being permanently removed, they withdrew their offers. The magnitude of Karen's deception was staggering. Sarah thought about all the complaints, the harassment, the social media posts, the code enforcement calls. Karen hadn't been protecting neighborhood property values. She'd been desperately trying to protect her own fraudulent sales strategy. "There's more," Tom continued reluctantly. "Lisa heard from Janet Morrison that Karen called the HOA president at 11 p.m. last night crying. Apparently, she begged Janet to find some way to force you to install another pool or water feature. She claimed her entire retirement plan was dependent on selling this house at her target price." Sarah shook her head in amazement. "So she thought she could harass me into maintaining her lie?" "Seems that way." Rick said Karen's realtor is furious because she misrepresented the property features. The agent specifically asked Karen if she had permission to use the neighbor's pool as a selling point, and Karen apparently said yes. Now the agent's worried about liability issues and misrepresentation claims. As if summoned by their conversation, Karen's front door opened and she emerged, clearly dressed for a showing. Full makeup, professional outfit, nervous energy radiating from every step. A sleek sedan pulled into her driveway moments later, and a woman in a business suit stepped out, followed by a young couple. Sarah and Tom watched from across the street as Karen greeted the potential buyers with an enthusiasm that bordered on manic. Even from a distance, they could see her gesturing animatedly toward her backyard, then towards Sarah's yard, her expressions becoming increasingly strained as she spoke. "Oh no," Tom murmured. "She's still trying to sell them on the pool view." They watched the realtor pull Karen aside for what appeared to be an intense whispered conversation. The agent kept pointing at Sarah's yard, where the empty space where the pool had been was clearly visible. Karen's face grew redder by the minute, her hand gestures becoming more frantic. The showing lasted exactly 12 minutes. Sarah could see the young couple exchanging glances, their body language shifting from interested to skeptical to completely uncomfortable. When they left, the realtor remained behind for another heated conversation with Karen, one that ended with the agent walking away mid-sentence while Karen called after her. "I think Karen just lost another buyer," Tom observed, "and possibly her realtor." Sarah's anger was tempered by a growing sense of satisfaction. Karen's elaborate deception was finally catching up with her, and the very behavior that was supposed to fix her problem was making it exponentially worse. "Tom, thank you for telling me this. I had no idea she was using my property to sell her house. I'm sorry we didn't speak up sooner. Lisa and I figured it wasn't our business, but when Karen started harassing you and filing false complaints," he shrugged apologetically. "Some things are more important than keeping the peace." That evening, Sarah received a call from Janet Morrison with news that confirmed everything Tom had told her. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. Karen's realtor contacted me today. Apparently, Karen has been claiming HOA approval for using your pool in her property marketing materials. The agent wanted to verify this because potential buyers have been asking about access to the pool amenities. And I told her the truth, that your pool was private property and Karen had no rights to it whatsoever. The agent was not pleased. She's dropping Karen as a client and suggested Karen might want to consult with a lawyer about potential misrepresentation issues." Sarah felt a grim satisfaction settle in over her. Karen's web of lies was unraveling, and the consequences were just beginning. But something told her that Karen wasn't going to go quietly into that good night. A person desperate enough to build an entire sales strategy around someone else's property wasn't likely to accept defeat gracefully. The real question was, what would Karen do when she realized her scheme had been exposed and her harassment campaign had backfired spectacularly? The consequences of Karen's deception came swift and merciless, starting with a certified letter that arrived at Sarah's door Friday morning. It wasn't addressed to her. It was for Karen, misdelivered by a postal worker who'd apparently grown tired of Karen's increasingly hostile interactions at her own mailbox. Sarah was walking the letter over to Karen's house when Tom intercepted her, shaking his head with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Don't bother," he said. "Karen's getting served papers faster than she can answer her door. That's probably from the city regarding her false reports to code enforcement." Tom was right. Within an hour, Sarah watched from her kitchen window as an official city vehicle pulled up to Karen's house. The code enforcement officer, the same Rodriguez who'd visited Sarah earlier in the week, spent 20 minutes on Karen's doorstep, his expression growing more stern by the minute. Later that afternoon, Sarah learned the details from Janet Morrison, who called with an update that carried both vindication and a touch of genuine concern. "Sarah, the city has fined Karen $500 for filing frivolous complaints," Janet reported. Apparently, when Officer Rodriguez investigated further, he discovered she made 11 separate calls about your property over 4 days, each with increasingly wild claims. The final straw was when she reported you for suspicious nighttime excavation because you were outside with a flashlight looking for your cat. 11 calls? It gets worse. The HOA board held an emergency meeting last night without Karen present, and we've issued her an official warning for harassment. If she files one more baseless complaint or continues this campaign against you, we're looking at potential legal action for creating a hostile living environment. But Karen's problems were multiplying faster than she could address them. By Saturday, the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing with news that her real estate situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. Sarah got the full story from Lisa Hendricks, who'd run into Karen's now former realtor at the grocery store. "The agent is furious," Lisa reported over coffee in Sarah's kitchen. Apparently, after she dropped Karen as a client, Karen started calling other agencies in town, trying to get representation. But word travels fast in the real estate community. 3 agencies have already refused to work with her because of the misrepresentation issues. What misrepresentation issues? Well, beyond lying about the pool access, Karen apparently told multiple potential buyers that the HOA was planning to install a community pool nearby, that the neighborhood had resort-style amenities, and that your backyard was part of a maintained green space program that would ensure perpetual scenic views. Lisa shook her head in disbelief. The woman created an entire fantasy neighborhood that doesn't exist. The ramifications extended beyond just losing real estate representation. Karen's mortgage payments were apparently based on her assumption that the house would sell quickly at her inflated asking price. With no agent, no buyers, and a reputation for misrepresentation following her around town, she was facing a financial crisis entirely of her own making. Sarah discovered just how deep Karen's hole had become when Mrs. Patterson approached her during her evening walk, looking genuinely worried. "Sarah, I hate to be the bearer of more bad news, but I think Karen's in real trouble," Mrs. Patterson said. "My daughter works at First National Bank, and she mentioned, without breaking any confidentiality of course, that they had several customers inquire about Karen's property situation. Apparently, word is getting around that anyone considering buying in this neighborhood should research the property disputes first." The final blow to Karen's credibility came Sunday evening in the form of her own social media presence coming back to haunt her. Tom's wife, Lisa, who'd been following the Willowbrook Neighborhood Watch Facebook group drama, showed Sarah the latest developments. "Look at this," Lisa said, scrolling through her phone. "Remember those frantic posts Karen made about your pool removal? Well, other neighbors started asking questions and someone did a little digging." The thread was brutal in its efficiency. A neighbor named Marcus had apparently taken screenshots of Karen's real estate listing, including the photos featuring Sarah's pool, and posted them alongside Karen's Facebook complaints about the pool removal affecting community property values. "Wait," Marcus had written, "isn't this the same pool that's featured in Karen's house listing as a luxury amenity? Why would removing your own pool affect her property values unless she was illegally using it as a selling point?" The threat had exploded from there. Neighbors who'd been confused by Karen's initial complaints suddenly understood the real motivation behind her harassment campaign. The community that Karen had tried to rally against Sarah had turned on her instead, with multiple residents expressing outrage at being manipulated and lied to. One comment from a neighbor named Patricia summed up the general sentiment. So Karen harassed Sarah for removing her own pool because Karen was lying to buyers about having access to it. And then Karen tried to make us the bad guys for not supporting her FRAUT. I'm disgusted. By Sunday night, Karen had deleted her Facebook account entirely, but screenshots of her posts were already circulating in other neighborhood groups. Her reputation wasn't just damaged, it was completely destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Karen's desperate attempts to save her fraudulent sales strategy had resulted in the complete destruction of her credibility, her real estate prospects, and her standing in the community. Every lie she'd told, every false complaint she'd filed, and every neighbor she tried to manipulate had been exposed and documented. As Sarah prepared for bed Sunday night, she could see Karen's house across the way and most of the lights off except for the upstairs bedroom, where Karen had spent so many hours photographing and obsessing over the pool that was no longer there. The for sale sign was still in the yard, but it looked forlorn and forgotten, much like Karen's chances of selling the house anytime soon. Tomorrow would bring the final chapter of the saga, and Sarah had a feeling that Karen's troubles were far from over. When someone builds their entire strategy on lies and harassment, the collapse tends to be both spectacular and complete. The woman who'd thought she could bully her neighbor into maintaining her deception was about to learn that actions have consequences, and some mistakes can't be undone. 3 months later, Sarah stood in her transformed backyard, admiring the thriving vegetable garden that had replaced her old pool. Tomatoes climbed neat trellises, herbs flourished in raised beds, and a small seating area provided the perfect spot for morning coffee. The space that had once been a maintenance headache had become the neighborhood's crown jewel. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. Mrs. Patterson stopped by regularly to ask for gardening advice. Tom and Lisa had requested cuttings from her herb garden, and even strangers walking by would pause to admire the neat rows of vegetables and flowers. The irony was delicious. Karen had claimed the pool removal would hurt property values, but Sarah's garden had actually increased them. "It's gorgeous, Sarah," said Janet Morrison, who'd stopped by for the neighborhood's monthly informal garden tour that had spontaneously developed around Sarah's backyard. "My realtor friend says properties on this block are getting more interest now because of your garden." Apparently, buyers love the idea of living in a neighborhood where people take pride in creating beautiful, productive spaces. The compliment was particularly sweet given what had happened to Karen's house. The for sale sign had remained in Karen's yard for 4 months, a neighborhood record. When the house finally sold, it was for $40,000 less than Karen's original asking price, and only after she'd made significant concessions to close the deal. Tom had gotten the details from his realtor friend Rick, who'd watched the saga unfold with professional fascination. Karen had disclosed the harassment complaints and HOA violations to potential buyers. Rick had explained. That spooked a lot of people. Plus, when buyers researched the neighborhood online, they found all those screenshots of her Facebook posts. Nobody wants to live next to someone with a history of lying to neighbors and filing false complaints. The financial impact on Karen had been severe. The reduced sale price, combined with the additional months of mortgage payments, property taxes, and maintenance costs, had cost her nearly $60,000. Her dream retirement had turned into a financial nightmare, all because she tried to profit from her neighbor's property. But the most satisfying consequence had been watching Karen's isolation in the community. The neighbors she tried to manipulate against Sarah had turned their backs on her completely. The woman who'd once styled herself as the neighborhood watch coordinator found herself persona non grata at community events, excluded from the informal social networks that made suburban life pleasant. Sarah had witnessed Karen's final humiliation firsthand during the neighborhood's annual summer barbecue in July. Karen had attempted to attend, apparently hoping enough time had passed for people to forget her behavior. Instead, she'd been met with polite but unmistakable cold shoulders. Conversations died when she approached, invitations were pointedly not extended, and she'd left after 20 awkward minutes, never to be seen at a community event again. "It's actually kind of sad," Sarah confided to Lisa Hendricks as they watched Karen's moving truck pull away on a crisp October morning. "I mean, she brought it all on herself, but watching someone destroy their entire life over a lie is pretty tragic." "Don't feel too bad for her," Lisa replied pragmatically. She had multiple opportunities to stop the harassment and come clean. Instead, she doubled down every time. Some people have to learn lessons the hard way. The new neighbors who moved into Karen's house were a young couple named David and Alina, both teachers who immediately endeared themselves to the community by asking Sarah for advice about starting their own garden. The contrast with Karen couldn't have been more stark. Where Karen had been entitled and manipulative, David and Alina were collaborative and genuine. "We heard about the previous owner from our realtor," Alina had mentioned during their first conversation over the fence. "She warned us that there had been some neighbor disputes, but honestly, everyone we've met has been wonderful. Especially you. Tom and Lisa told us you're the reason this neighborhood has such a strong sense of community now." Sarah had laughed at that. "I think you have that backwards. I just removed an old pool and planted a garden." "No, it's more than that," David had insisted. "The neighbors told us how you handled that whole harassment situation with grace and dignity. You could have escalated it, could have been vindictive, but you just focused on your own life and let the truth speak for itself. That's the kind of neighbor everyone wants. A year later, Sarah's garden had become a neighborhood institution. She'd started a seed exchange program, organized informal weekend workshops for aspiring gardeners, and had even convinced the HOA to approve a community composting program. The space that Karen had desperately wanted to keep as an artificial selling point had become something far more valuable, a genuine source of community connection and pride. The final twist in the story came when Sarah received a LinkedIn message from Karen's former realtor asking if she'd be interested in having her garden featured in a local home and garden magazine article about neighborhood transformations that increase property values. "Your garden project has become something of a case study in our office," the agent had written. "We use it as an example of how authentic improvements that reflect personal passion always outperform artificial amenities when it comes to lasting property value. Would you be interested in sharing your story?" Sarah had agreed on one condition, that the article include a sidebar about the importance of honest communication between neighbors and the dangers of misrepresenting property features in real estate transactions. It was a subtle way of ensuring that Karen's cautionary tale would have a lasting impact beyond their little neighborhood. As Sarah sat in her garden that evening, watching the sunset paint her tomato plants golden, she reflected on the lessons learned from the Karen saga. Sometimes the best response to bullying and manipulation isn't escalation or revenge. It's simply continuing to live your life with integrity and letting the truth reveal itself. Karen had thought she could control her neighbors through harassment and lies, but in the end, she had only controlled her own downfall. Meanwhile, Sarah had simply focused on creating something beautiful and authentic, and had ended up with both a gorgeous garden and a stronger community. The pool was gone, but what had grown in its place was far more valuable than anything Karen could have ever imagined. And that, Sarah thought, the satisfaction was the sweetest justice of all.